My name is Emma Davis, I'm 34 years old, and this is the story of how I was betrayed by the one person I trusted the most. Picture this. You spend weeks planning the perfect romantic surprise for your husband's birthday, only to walk into a hospital room and hear him screaming, "Save her now," about another woman. You won't believe what happened next, because what I discovered that night changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and my own marriage. The woman lying on that hospital bed wasn't just any stranger. She was carrying my husband's baby. Have you ever felt your entire world crumble in a single moment? If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved deeply, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because today I'm sharing the most painful yet transformative experience of my life. I know many of you have been through heartbreak, and I want you to know you're not alone in this journey. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about finding strength you never knew you had. So grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let me tell you about the night that destroyed my marriage, but ultimately saved my life. Trust me, you'll want to hear every single detail of what happened next. I had been married to my husband Jake for 8 wonderful years, or so I thought. We met during my residency at St. Mary's Hospital, where I was training to become a cardiologist, and he worked as a financial advisor for the hospital's investment portfolio. Jake was charming, funny, and seemed to understand the demanding nature of my career better than anyone I'd ever dated. Our relationship felt like a fairy tale. Late-night dinners after my shifts, weekend getaways when I could steal time away from the hospital. Everyone said we were the perfect couple, and honestly, I believed them completely. But behind our seemingly perfect marriage, I was hiding a devastating secret that ate away at me every single day. For 3 years, I had been struggling with infertility, and I never told Jake the truth about my condition. Every month brought another wave of disappointment, another negative pregnancy test, another reminder that I couldn't give him the family he dreamed of. I watched him light up whenever he saw children, saw how he talked about our future kids with such excitement and hope. The guilt was crushing me, but I convinced myself that hiding this truth was protecting him from unnecessary pain. That Tuesday evening in March, I had spent the entire day preparing what I thought would be the most romantic surprise of our marriage. It was Jake's 36th birthday, and I had planned everything down to the last detail. His favorite dinner from the Italian restaurant where we had our first date, candles throughout our apartment, and a weekend getaway to the mountains he'd been wanting to visit. I even took the day off from the hospital, which was practically unheard of for me, because I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect. Little did I know that while I was setting up rose petals and chilling champagne, my husband was rushing another woman to the emergency room. The theme of tonight's story runs deeper than simple betrayal. It's about the lies we tell ourselves and others in the name of love. As a doctor, I had dedicated my life to healing people, to fixing what was broken, but I couldn't fix the one thing that mattered most to me. I couldn't give my husband a child, and instead of facing that reality together, I chose to suffer in silence. The irony wasn't lost on me that I could save lives every day at the hospital, but I couldn't save my own marriage from the secret that was slowly destroying it. This story is about learning that sometimes the people closest to us are living completely different lives than we imagine.
Have you ever wondered if the person sleeping next to you every night is really the person you think they are? If you've ever questioned whether you truly know someone you love, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because this story will make you think twice about the secrets we keep. I want to connect with anyone who's ever felt like they're living a double life, whether it's hiding pain, disappointment, or struggles that feel too heavy to share. Sometimes we think we're protecting the people we love, but we're actually building walls that push them further away. Share in the comments if you've ever kept a secret to protect someone you cared about. What makes this story particularly heartbreaking is that both Jake and I were living with secrets, but neither of us knew about the other's hidden truth. While I was hiding my infertility and drowning in shame about not being able to conceive, he was building an entirely separate relationship with someone else. I spent years thinking I was the problem in our marriage, that my inability to get pregnant was slowly killing our relationship. Every time he mentioned wanting children, every time he joked about baby names or talked about converting the spare room into a nursery, I felt like a fraud. I was convinced that if he knew the truth about my condition, he would leave me for someone who could give him the family he wanted. The emotional weight of keeping such a massive secret was suffocating, but I had convinced myself that ignorance was bliss for both of us. I thought I was being noble by carrying this burden alone, by sparing him the disappointment and heartbreak of knowing we might never have biological children together. In my mind, as long as he didn't know, there was still hope, still the possibility that maybe next month would be different. I threw myself into my work at the hospital, taking extra shifts and staying late to avoid going home to face the emptiness of our spare bedroom. But what I didn't realize was that my emotional distance was pushing Jake away, creating space for someone else to fill the void I thought I was protecting him from.
The truth is, betrayal rarely happens in a vacuum. It grows in the spaces between us, in the words we don't say, and the truths we're too afraid to share. As I stood in that hospital room later that night, watching my husband panic over another woman's emergency, I realized that our marriage had been slowly dying from 1,000 small deceptions. We had both been living lies, just different ones, and the collision of our separate secrets created a devastating explosion that destroyed everything we had built together. But that's when things took a turn I never saw coming, and you won't believe how this story unfolds. From the outside, Jake and I had what everyone called the perfect marriage, the kind that made other couples jealous at dinner parties. We lived in a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in the heart of downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline, and a kitchen where we used to cook together every Sunday morning. I was a successful cardiologist at one of the most prestigious hospitals in the state, and Jake had built a thriving financial consulting business that allowed him flexible hours and good money. Our social media was filled with photos of romantic getaways, anniversary dinners, and moments that seemed to capture pure happiness. Everyone always commented on how lucky we were to have found each other, how we were relationship goals that other couples aspired to become. But behind those perfect Instagram photos and dinner party smiles, I was slowly suffocating under the weight of my own expectations. I had convinced myself that being the perfect wife meant never burdening Jake with my problems, never showing him the cracks in my seemingly flawless exterior. When he came home stressed from work, I was always ready with his favorite meal and a listening ear, never mentioning my own exhausting 12-hour shifts or the emotional toll of losing patience. I scheduled our social calendar, remembered every anniversary and birthday, and made sure our home was always welcoming and beautiful. In my mind, perfection was the price I paid for love, and I was determined to pay it no matter what it cost me. Jake seemed to thrive in our carefully constructed paradise, and that made me believe I was doing everything right. He would brag to his friends about having a wife who was both beautiful and brilliant, someone who could save lives during the day and still come home to create a warm, loving environment. He loved showing me off at hospital fundraisers and company parties, introducing me as my wife, the heart surgeon, with obvious pride in his voice. These moments filled me with such joy because they felt like proof that despite my hidden struggles, I was enough for him. I measured my worth as a wife by his happiness, and as long as he seemed content, I convinced myself that our marriage was everything it appeared to be. Our daily routines had become a perfectly choreographed dance that we both performed without missing a beat. Morning coffee together before we left for work, evening walks around our neighborhood when our schedules aligned, weekend trips to farmers markets and art galleries that filled our apartment with fresh flowers and beautiful memories. We had our special restaurants for celebrating good news, our favorite hiking trails for when we needed to reconnect with nature, and a shared love of old movies that kept us cuddled on the couch most Sunday nights. These rituals felt sacred to me, like the foundation stones of a marriage that would last forever, and I protected them fiercely because they represented everything I thought love was supposed to look like. The most heartbreaking part was that our happiness wasn't fake. It was real, but it was built on a foundation of half-truths and omissions that neither of us acknowledged. Jake genuinely loved me, and I genuinely loved him, but we were both loving, carefully edited versions of each other rather than the complete, messy, complicated people we actually were. I thought I was preserving our perfect life by hiding my infertility struggles, not realizing that my emotional walls were creating distance between us. Every perfectly planned dinner, every thoughtfully chosen gift, every moment of manufactured perfection was my way of compensating for what I saw as my fundamental failure as a woman and a wife. But perfection, as I was about to learn in the most devastating way possible, is just another word for unsustainable. The secret I carried about my infertility wasn't just a medical condition. It was a daily reminder that I was failing at the one thing society told me I was supposed to excel at as a woman. Every negative pregnancy test felt like another nail in the coffin of my self-worth, another piece of evidence that I was fundamentally broken in a way that couldn't be fixed. I had been trying to conceive for 3 long years, and each month brought the same crushing disappointment when my period arrived right on schedule. The irony of being a doctor who could heal hearts but couldn't make my own body work the way it was supposed to wasn't lost on me. I scheduled fertility appointments under fake names at different hospitals, terrified that someone from my workplace might see me and start asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. If you've ever felt like you're carrying a secret so heavy it might crush you, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like because I know exactly how isolating that feels. I spent 3 years feeling completely alone in my struggle, watching friends announce pregnancies on social media while I smiled and congratulated them through tears they couldn't see. Maybe you're carrying your own secret right now. Whether it's infertility, depression, financial struggles, or any other burden that feels too shameful to share. I want you to know that your pain is valid, and you don't have to carry it alone forever. Drop a comment and let me know if you've ever hidden something important from someone you love because you were afraid of disappointing them. The worst part about keeping this secret was watching Jake's face light up every time he saw babies or young families in public. He would point out cute kids at restaurants and make jokes about how ours would be even cuter, or he'd stop to pet dogs and mention how great it would be to have both kids and pets running around our apartment. During family gatherings, he would hold his nieces and nephews with such natural ease, and I could see in his eyes how much he was looking forward to being a father himself. These moments felt like knives twisting in my chest because I knew I was the obstacle standing between him and his dreams. I started avoiding baby showers and family events where children would be present, making excuses about work schedules and emergency surgeries that sometimes weren't even real. My infertility had become this monster that lived in every corner of our relationship, even though Jake didn't know it existed. I found myself analyzing every conversation for hidden meanings, wondering if his casual comments about our future family were actually criticisms of my inability to get pregnant. When he suggested we start thinking about converting the spare bedroom into something more useful, I panicked, thinking he had somehow figured out that we weren't going to need a nursery. I became hypersensitive to any mention of children, family planning, or even just comments about getting older, convinced that each one was evidence that he was growing impatient with our childless state. The mental and emotional energy I spent managing this secret was exhausting, but I couldn't see any other option. What I didn't understand then was that my secret keeping was creating exactly the kind of emotional distance that I was trying to prevent. By hiding such a fundamental part of my struggle, I was essentially living as half a person in my own marriage, showing Jake only the parts of myself that I deemed acceptable or worthy of love. I stopped initiating intimate conversations because I was afraid they might lead to discussions about our future family, and I threw myself even deeper into work as a way to avoid the growing emptiness in our home. Jake began to seem distant too, but I attributed it to stress from his business rather than recognizing that he might be feeling shut out from my emotional world. Little did I know that while I was building walls to protect him from my infertility, he was building his own walls to hide a betrayal that would shatter everything I thought I knew about our marriage. The morning of Jake's 36th birthday, I woke up with a sense of excitement that I hadn't felt in months. I had been planning this surprise for weeks, carefully coordinating every detail while he was at work or busy with client meetings. This wasn't just going to be another birthday celebration. This was going to be my way of showing him how much our marriage meant to me, how much I appreciated everything he brought to our life together. I had taken the entire day off from the hospital, which was practically unheard of for me, because I wanted to personally oversee every aspect of the surprise. In my mind, this perfect evening was going to be the reset button our relationship needed, the moment that would bring us closer together again. I started the day by driving to our favorite Italian restaurant, Bella Notte, where we had our very first date 8 years earlier. The owner, Mrs. Romano, still remembered us as the young couple who used to sit at table 12 every Friday night during my residency, sharing tiramisu and talking about our dreams for the future. She had agreed to prepare Jake's favorite meal for pickup, the seafood risotto that he always ordered, along with the chocolate cannoli that made him smile like a little kid every single time. As I waited for the food, I couldn't help but remember how nervous I had been on that first date, how Jake had made me laugh so hard that I nearly spit out my wine. Those memories felt like they belonged to different people, and I was desperate to find our way back to that effortless happiness. The apartment transformation took me the entire afternoon, but every minute felt like an investment in our future together. I had ordered 24 red roses from the florist downtown, the same type Jake had surprised me with on our first anniversary, and I scattered the petals from the front door all the way to our dining room table. Candles of different heights created a warm, romantic glow throughout our living space, and I had even managed to find our old playlist from college, the one we used to dance to in my tiny dorm room when we were first falling in love. The dining room table was set with our wedding china, the good silverware we only used for special occasions, and cloth napkins that I had ironed until they were perfectly crisp. Everything looked like something out of a romantic movie. The final touch was a photo album I had been secretly working on for months, filled with pictures from our entire relationship. From our awkward college photos to our wedding day to recent vacation snapshots that captured us at our happiest moments. Each page told the story of our love, with little handwritten notes about my favorite memories and inside jokes that only we understood. I had written a letter to go with the album, telling Jake how grateful I was for every day we had spent together and how excited I was for all the adventures still waiting for us. The letter was 3 pages long, and I must have rewritten it a dozen times, trying to capture everything I felt, but couldn't always express out loud during our busy daily routines. By 6 o'clock, everything was perfect. The food was warming in the oven, the candles were lit, soft jazz music was playing in the background, and I was wearing the blue dress that Jake had told me was his favorite. I had even splurged on a bottle of champagne from the year we got married, thinking we could toast to our past while making promises about our future. As I stood in our living room, surrounded by roses and candlelight, I felt more hopeful about our marriage than I had in months. I was convinced that this perfect evening would somehow bridge the emotional distance I had been feeling between us, that romance and thoughtfulness could heal whatever small cracks had formed in our foundation. But Jake was 2 hours late, and my phone calls were going straight to voicemail, and I had no idea that he was at the hospital dealing with an emergency that would destroy everything I thought I knew about our life together. By 9 o'clock that night, I was no longer excited. I was worried, then angry, then worried again, in an endless cycle that was making me sick to my stomach. Jake had never been this late without calling, especially not on his own birthday when he knew I had something special planned for him. I had tried his cell phone at least 15 times, texted him repeatedly, and even called his office line hoping to reach him there, but everything went straight to voicemail. The food was getting cold, the candles were burning dangerously low, and the romantic atmosphere I had spent all day creating was starting to feel ridiculous rather than special. My mind was racing through every possible explanation. Car trouble, a work emergency, maybe he had forgotten and made other plans, but nothing felt quite right. Finally, at 9:30, I decided to drive to his office building to see if his car was still in the parking garage. The building was mostly empty, with just a few security guards and cleaning crews working the night shift, and Jake's reserved parking spot was completely vacant. A cold dread started settling in my stomach as I realized I had no idea where my husband was or what could be keeping him away from home for so long. I sat in my car for a few minutes trying to decide what to do next, when my phone finally rang with a call from Jake's number. But instead of his voice, I heard a woman speaking rapidly, saying something about St. Mary's Hospital and an emergency, and asking if I was Emma Davis, Jake's wife. The 20-minute drive to St. Mary's Hospital felt like the longest journey of my entire life, with my mind creating increasingly horrible scenarios about what kind of emergency could have befallen my husband. As a doctor, I knew too well all the terrible things that could happen to someone in the span of a few hours. Car accidents, heart attacks, strokes, any number of medical crises that could change a life forever. I kept trying to call the number back, but it went straight to voicemail, leaving me completely in the dark about Jake's condition or what exactly had happened to him. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was racing to the very hospital where I worked, the place where I saved other people's loved ones, to find out if my own husband was going to be okay. When I finally reached the emergency department, I ran straight to the nurse's station where my colleague Jennifer was working the night shift. She looked surprised to see me, especially since I wasn't scheduled to be on call. And when I frantically asked about Jake, her expression shifted from confusion to something that looked almost like pity. She told me that Jake had brought in a woman who was in premature labor, that they were both in room 12, and that I should probably go see for myself what was happening. The way she said it, with that careful tone that medical professionals use when they're trying to prepare someone for bad news, made my blood run cold. I had heard that exact tone in my own voice when I had to deliver devastating diagnoses to patients' families. As I walked down the familiar hallway toward room 12, I could hear shouting coming from behind the closed door. Jake's voice, panicked and desperate, yelling, "Save her now, please, somebody help her!" The sound of my husband in such distress should have made me run faster, should have triggered every instinct I had as both a doctor and a wife to help in whatever way I could. But something about the situation felt wrong in a way I couldn't quite articulate, and I found myself slowing down as I approached the room, my hand hesitating on the door handle. When I finally pushed open that door, I saw my husband holding the hand of a woman I had never seen before, a woman who was clearly in labor, and the expression on his face was one of pure terror mixed with something that looked suspiciously like love. That's when I realized that my perfect marriage, my carefully planned evening, and everything I thought I knew about my life was about to be completely destroyed. The moment I stepped into that hospital room, my entire world collapsed in a way that no amount of medical training could have prepared me for. There was Jake, my husband of 8 years, holding the hand of a beautiful blonde woman who was clearly in the final stages of labor, whispering words of comfort and encouragement that I had only ever heard him use with me. The woman, who couldn't have been older than 25, was crying and gripping his hand like her life depended on it, and Jake was stroking her hair with a tenderness that made my stomach lurch with recognition. This wasn't the panic of a good Samaritan helping a stranger in distress. This was the intimate concern of a man watching the mother of his child bring their baby into the world. The way he looked at her, the way he touched her face, the way he seemed to know exactly what she needed. It was everything I had been missing in our marriage, and I was watching him give it to someone else. If you've ever had your heart shattered into a million pieces in a single moment, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button because you're not alone in this pain. I know some of you watching this have walked in on scenes that changed your life forever. Moments where everything you believed about love and loyalty got turned upside down. Maybe it was finding text messages. Maybe it was catching them together. Or maybe it was something like this. A moment where the truth became so obvious that denial was no longer possible. Share in the comments if you've ever had to face a betrayal that felt like it might destroy you, because I want you to know that survival is possible, even when it doesn't feel like it. Emma? Jake's voice cracked when he saw me standing in the doorway, and the guilt that flashed across his face told me everything I needed to know about the situation. He tried to drop the woman's hand, but she gripped it tighter and cried out in pain as another contraction hit, and I watched my husband's attention immediately return to her, choosing to comfort his pregnant mistress instead of explaining himself to his wife. The woman, Sarah, as I would later learn, looked up at me with a mixture of fear and defiance, as if she knew exactly who I was, but wasn't about to apologize for her presence in my husband's life. In that moment, standing in my own workplace watching my marriage disintegrate, I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience, like I was watching someone else's tragedy unfold rather than living through my own. "She's having complications," Jake said, as if that explained anything, as if that justified why he was here with another woman instead of home celebrating his birthday with his wife. "The baby is coming early and she needs help, Emma, please." The desperation in his voice wasn't for our marriage or for my forgiveness. It was for this other woman and the child they had created together while I was at home planning romantic surprises and hiding my infertility like some shameful secret. I realized that while I had been torturing myself about not being able to give him children, he had already found someone who could, someone who was about to deliver the family I thought we were building together. The betrayal wasn't just that he had cheated on me, it was that he had created an entire parallel life that included everything I thought we wanted together. As I stood there watching Sarah scream through another contraction, my medical training kicked in despite the emotional chaos raging in my head, and I found myself automatically assessing her condition and the urgency of the situation. But even as the doctor in me recognized that she needed immediate attention, the wife in me was drowning in a tsunami of rage, heartbreak, and disbelief that threatened to bring me to my knees right there on the hospital floor. Jake kept looking back and forth between Sarah and me, clearly torn between his responsibility to his mistress and child, and some belated recognition that his wife had just discovered the most devastating betrayal imaginable. The room felt like it was spinning, and I had to grab the doorframe to keep myself steady as the full weight of what I was witnessing hit me. My husband hadn't just cheated on me, he had built an entire relationship, gotten another woman pregnant, and was now choosing her over me in the most public and humiliating way possible. In that moment, standing in the hospital room watching my husband comfort another woman through labor, I experienced a level of internal conflict that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Part of me, the doctor part, recognized that Sarah needed immediate medical attention and that personal drama had no place in a medical emergency where two lives were at stake. But the wife part of me wanted to scream, to throw things, to demand answers from Jake about how long this had been going on and how he could do this to our marriage. The rational part of my brain was cataloging Sarah's symptoms and calculating risks, while the emotional part was spinning through memories of our entire relationship, trying to figure out when Jake had stopped being mine and started being hers. It felt like my mind was splitting in two, trying to process the medical emergency and the personal catastrophe simultaneously. The most torturous part was that I couldn't even allow myself the luxury of a complete breakdown, because Sarah was clearly in distress and needed help that only I was qualified to provide in that moment. My colleague, Dr. Martinez, burst into the room just as Sarah's blood pressure started dropping dangerously, and I found myself automatically switching into emergency mode, calling out orders for medications and equipment, while Jake stepped back to let us work. But even as I was trying to save his mistress and their baby, part of me was wondering if this was some kind of cosmic joke, that I, the infertile wife, was being forced to deliver the child my husband had made with another woman. The irony was so cruel it almost felt intentional, like the universe was determined to twist the knife as deeply as possible. As we worked to stabilize Sarah's condition, I caught glimpses of Jake pacing in the corner, his face pale with worry and his hands shaking as he watched us fight to save the woman carrying his child. The raw fear in his eyes wasn't something I could fake or misinterpret. He genuinely loved this woman, genuinely cared about the baby she was carrying, and that realization hit me harder than the initial shock of discovering the affair. This wasn't just a physical betrayal or a moment of weakness. Jake had fallen in love with someone else, had built a relationship with someone else. had created life with someone else while I was at home hiding my infertility and planning romantic surprises for a man who was already emotionally gone. The depth of his investment in Sarah and their baby made our 8-year marriage feel like a lie. Every medical decision I made in those critical minutes felt like I was simultaneously saving and destroying myself. When Sarah's contractions intensified and we realized the baby was in distress, I made the call to prepare for an emergency C-section, knowing that I was potentially saving the life of the child who represented everything I couldn't give my husband. As we wheeled Sarah toward the operating room, Jake grabbed my arm and looked at me with eyes full of tears. And for a split second, I thought he was going to apologize, was going to try to explain or ask for forgiveness. Instead, he just whispered, "Thank you," and followed the gurney down the hall, leaving me standing alone in the empty room surrounded by the remnants of the medical emergency that had just exposed the wreckage of my personal life. The silence that followed was deafening, and I found myself sinking into the chair Jake had been sitting in, still warm from his presence, trying to process what had just happened and what it meant for every aspect of my existence. My hands were shaking, whether from adrenaline or shock I couldn't tell, and I realized that I was completely alone in a way I had never experienced before. Alone in my marriage, alone in my knowledge of Jake's betrayal, alone in my infertility, and now alone in the knowledge that the man I loved had chosen someone else to build the family I couldn't give him. The worst part was that I couldn't even hate Sarah entirely, because she was just another woman who had fallen in love with my husband, another woman who wanted the same things I wanted, the only difference being that her body could actually deliver on those dreams while mine had failed me completely. 2 hours later, I found myself standing outside the recovery room where Sarah was resting after her successful C-section, holding a healthy baby boy who looked exactly like Jake did in his old college photos. The surgery had gone smoothly, and both mother and baby were stable, which should have felt like a victory given the complications we had faced earlier. But instead, I felt hollow, like I was sleepwalking through someone else's nightmare, mechanically going through the motions of being a doctor while my personal world continued to crumble around me. Through the window, I could see Jake sitting beside Sarah's bed, holding their son with a look of pure wonder and love that I had never seen on his face before. The three of them looked like a perfect little family, and I was the outsider looking in on the life that should have been mine. What struck me most about Sarah as I watched her interact with Jake and their newborn son was how young and vulnerable she seemed despite being the other woman who had destroyed my marriage. She couldn't have been more than 25, with that fresh-faced innocence that made her look more like a college student than someone who had been having an affair with a married man. As the medical team briefed her on post-surgical care, I noticed how she hung on every word, clearly scared and overwhelmed by the responsibility of new motherhood. She kept looking to Jake for reassurance, and he provided it without hesitation, stroking her hair and whispering words of encouragement that made my chest ache with jealousy and loss. The more I observed their interactions, the more I realized that Sarah might be as much a victim in this situation as I was, just in a different way. She was barely out of college, working as a receptionist at Jake's office building, according to the intake forms I had glanced at while she was in surgery. The power dynamic between them was troubling. He was an established, married businessman in his mid-30s, and she was a young woman just starting her adult life who probably had no idea what she was getting into when their relationship began. I found myself wondering if Jake had pursued her the same way he had pursued me all those years ago, with his charm and confidence and promises of a future together, except this time he had conveniently forgotten to mention that he already had a wife at home. As I watched Sarah struggle to breastfeed for the first time, her face twisted with frustration and exhaustion, I felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for her situation. Here she was, a new mother trying to figure out how to care for her baby while recovering from major surgery, and the father of her child was married to someone else with no clear plan for how their family was supposed to work. Jake had created this impossible situation where Sarah would always be the secret, always be hidden, always be competing with a wife she had never met for the attention and commitment of the man she loved. In a way, she was trapped just as much as I was, bound to Jake by a child but unable to have the open, honest relationship that every woman deserved. Standing there watching this young woman navigate the overwhelming experience of new motherhood, while her married lover divided his attention between her and damage control with his wife, I realized that Jake's betrayal had created multiple victims, not just me. Sarah would spend the rest of her life sharing the father of her child with another woman, never knowing when he might choose his wife over his son, never having the security of a committed relationship that wasn't built on lies and deception. Their baby boy would grow up in the shadow of his father's double life, potentially facing questions about why daddy lived somewhere else, and why they had to keep their relationship secret from the world. The ripple effects of Jake's choices were going to destroy multiple lives, And watching it unfold in real time made me realize that the man I had married wasn't the person I thought he was at all. The walk from Sarah's recovery room to the hospital parking garage felt like the longest journey of my entire life, as if each step was taking me further away from the woman I used to be and closer to someone I didn't recognize. My legs felt unsteady beneath me, and I had to stop twice to lean against the wall as waves of nausea and dizziness washed over me from the emotional shock of the evening. Everything felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream where nothing quite made sense and reality kept shifting beneath my feet. The fluorescent hospital lights seemed too bright, the sounds of medical equipment and overhead pages seemed too loud, and I kept expecting to wake up back in my apartment surrounded by birthday candles and rose petals, realizing that this whole nightmare had been just that, a terrible dream. If you're watching this and you've ever had to face a betrayal that felt like it might kill you, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because I need you to know that what you're feeling is valid and you're going to survive this. I know right now it feels impossible, like the pain is too big for your body to contain, like you'll never be able to breathe normally again, or trust anyone, or feel happy about anything ever again. Maybe you discovered texts, maybe you walked in on them, maybe someone told you, or maybe like me, you stumbled into a situation that revealed everything at once. Tell me in the comments how you found out about your betrayal, because I want you to know that you're not alone in this devastating experience. As I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage, unable to start the engine because my hands were shaking too badly to turn the key, I tried to process the magnitude of what Jake's betrayal actually meant for every aspect of my life. This wasn't just about him sleeping with someone else. This was about him building an entire relationship, falling in love with someone else, creating a child with someone else, and maintaining an elaborate lie for what must have been at least 9 months, possibly longer. Every kiss he had given me, every "I love you," every romantic gesture or intimate moment we had shared during that time had been contaminated by his relationship with Sarah. Our anniversary dinner 6 months ago, our weekend trip to the mountains, the quiet Sunday mornings we spent reading the newspaper in bed, all of it had been happening while he was also playing house with another woman and preparing to become a father with her. The betrayal went deeper than just the affair itself. It was the systematic deception that had allowed him to live a double life, while I remained completely oblivious to his duplicity. While I had been hiding my infertility out of shame and a misguided desire to protect him, he had been hiding an entire relationship and impending fatherhood that represented everything I thought we wanted together, but couldn't achieve. The cruel irony was that I had been torturing myself about not being able to give him children while he was already expecting a child with someone else, making my secret-keeping and self-flagellation completely pointless. I had spent 3 years feeling like a failure as a wife, when the reality was that my husband had already emotionally and physically moved on to someone who could give him what he wanted. Sitting there in the darkness of the parking garage, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of the hospital where I had spent so much of my adult life, I realized that I was going to have to rebuild my entire sense of self from the ground up. Every assumption I had made about my marriage, my worth as a woman, my future, and even my past was now suspect, and would need to be examined in the harsh light of this new reality. I was 34 years old, infertile, and married to a man who had just had a baby with someone else. A combination of circumstances that felt like a cruel joke the universe was playing at my expense. But as I finally managed to start my car and begin the drive home to an apartment full of cold birthday dinner and melted candles, I also realized that for the first time in 3 years, I was no longer carrying the secret of my infertility alone. And somehow, in the midst of all this devastation, that felt like the beginning of something that might eventually resemble freedom. The drive home from the hospital gave me 45 minutes of complete silence to begin processing the earthquake that had just hit my life, and by the time I pulled into our apartment building's parking garage, something had shifted inside me. The initial shock and devastation were still there, crushing my chest and making it hard to breathe. But underneath all that pain, a different emotion was starting to emerge. Anger, but not the destructive kind that makes you want to burn everything down. This was the kind of righteous anger that comes when you realize you've been treated unfairly, when you understand that you deserve better than what you've been given. For 3 years, I had been carrying the weight of my infertility like some kind of personal failure, but Jake's betrayal had just shown me that our marriage problems were never about my inability to conceive. They were about his inability to be honest and faithful. If you've ever reached that moment where you stop blaming yourself for someone else's bad behavior, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because that realization is the first step toward reclaiming your power. I know many of you have spent months or years wondering what you did wrong, what you could have done differently, how you could have been a better partner to prevent the betrayal you suffered. Maybe you blamed yourself for working too much, for not being attractive enough, for not being interesting enough, or in my case, for not being able to have children. But I want you to understand something important. Other people's choices to lie, cheat, and betray are never about your shortcomings. They're about their character flaws. As I walked into our apartment and saw the remnants of the birthday surprise I had so carefully planned, the cold dinner, the burned-down candles, the wilted rose petals scattered across the floor, I felt something inside me crystallize into determination rather than despair. This scene, which a few hours earlier had represented my love and devotion to my marriage, now looked like evidence of how completely one-sided our relationship had become. While I was home planning romantic gestures and hiding my pain to protect Jake's feelings, he was at the hospital with his pregnant mistress, choosing her comfort over any consideration for his wife. The inequality of it was staggering, and I realized that I had been giving everything to a man who had been giving his heart to someone else. But even as the anger grew stronger, I found myself thinking about Sarah and that tiny baby boy who looked so much like Jake, and I knew that any decision I made about my future had to take them into consideration too. Sarah might have been the other woman, but she was also a new mother who was completely dependent on Jake for emotional and financial support, and their innocent child deserved to have a father who was present and committed to his well-being. The situation was messy and painful, but it wasn't entirely about me and my wounded pride. There were other lives involved now, other people who would be affected by whatever choices Jake and I made about our marriage going forward. Standing in my destroyed apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my naive hope and Jake's betrayal, I realized that I had two choices. I could let this devastation destroy me completely, or I could use it as an opportunity to finally start living authentically, without secrets, and without settling for less than I deserved. Justice in this case wasn't going to be about revenge or punishment. It was going to be about honesty, about demanding transparency from Jake about his intentions, and about making decisions based on reality rather than the fantasy of the perfect marriage I had been trying to maintain. For the first time in 3 years, I was going to stop hiding my infertility, stop protecting Jake from difficult conversations, and start advocating for my own needs and happiness, whatever that meant for our future together. The next morning brought a level of emotional pain that I hadn't known was possible, not just heartbreak, but a deep, physical ache that seemed to live in my bones and made even simple tasks like getting dressed or making coffee feel insurmountable. I woke up on the couch where I had collapsed the night before, still wearing the blue dress that Jake had said was his favorite, now wrinkled and stained with tears I didn't remember crying. For a few blissful seconds after opening my eyes, I forgot what had happened, and I started to get up to make Jake's morning coffee the way I had every day for 8 years. Then, reality came crashing back. The hospital, Sarah, the baby, the betrayal, and I had to run to the bathroom to throw up from the sheer overwhelm of remembering that my life had been completely destroyed in a single evening. Jake came home around 10 that morning, looking haggard and exhausted, clearly having spent the night at the hospital with Sarah and their newborn son, rather than coming home to deal with the wreckage of our marriage. He found me sitting at our kitchen table, still in the same dress from the night before, staring at the photo album I had made for his birthday. The album full of pictures that now felt like documentation of an elaborate lie rather than a celebration of our love story. When he saw me sitting there, his face crumpled with what looked like genuine remorse, but I was beyond the point where his emotions could affect my decision-making process. I had spent the sleepless night thinking about our entire relationship with new clarity, and I realized that this betrayal was probably not the first time Jake had been dishonest with me. It was just the first time I had discovered it. "Emma, I can explain," were the first words out of his mouth, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of that statement, because what was there to explain that I hadn't already witnessed with my own eyes? Instead, I asked him the only question that mattered. How long? The answer was worse than I had imagined. 18 months of secret meetings, late-night phone calls, weekend trips that he had disguised as work conferences, and an entire relationship that had been happening in parallel to our marriage. Sarah had been 3 months pregnant during our last anniversary dinner, 6 months pregnant during our romantic weekend getaway to the mountains, and in her final trimester during the Christmas holidays we had spent with my parents. Every special moment from the past year and a half had been contaminated by his double life. As Jake tried to explain his actions, talking about feeling disconnected from me, about my emotional distance, about Sarah making him feel needed and appreciated in ways I apparently hadn't, I realized that he was essentially blaming me for his decision to cheat, rather than taking responsibility for his choices. According to his version of events, my dedication to my career and my reluctance to discuss starting a family had pushed him into the arms of a younger woman who was more available and enthusiastic about the future he wanted. The fact that I had been hiding my infertility out of shame and fear never occurred to him as a possible explanation for my behavior, because he had never bothered to ask me what was wrong or create space for honest conversation about our struggles. The most heartbreaking part of that conversation was when Jake told me that he loved Sarah, that their relationship wasn't just physical but emotional, and that he wanted to be a real father to their son even if it meant ending our marriage. In some twisted way, I respected his honesty, because at least he wasn't trying to minimize his feelings or pretend that this had been a meaningless fling that could be forgotten with enough counseling and forgiveness. But hearing him talk about Sarah with the kind of passion and certainty that I remembered from the early days of our relationship felt like watching him choose her all over again, and I knew that whatever love he might still have for me was nothing compared to what he felt for the woman who had given him the child I couldn't. That's when I realized that the death of our marriage wasn't something that had happened overnight. It had been a slow process that had been going on for months, and I had just been the last one to find out. 3 weeks after that devastating conversation with Jake, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop downtown with my colleague, Dr. Rebecca Chen, finally telling someone the whole truth about my infertility, my marriage, and the betrayal that had turned my world upside down. Rebecca and I had worked together for 2 years, but our relationship had always been strictly professional. Polite conversations in the break room, collaborative discussions about patient care, but never anything personal or intimate. However, she had noticed my distraction at work, the way I seemed to be going through the motions without my usual passion and precision, and she had gently asked if everything was okay at home. When I broke down and told her everything, expecting judgment or awkward sympathy, she surprised me by sharing her own story of discovering her ex-husband's affair and how it had ultimately led to the best years of her life. If you've ever felt completely alone in your pain, thinking that no one could possibly understand what you're going through, please subscribe and hit that like button, because I want you to know that there are people out there who will not only understand, but will help you find your strength again. Rebecca became the first person I told about my infertility struggles, and instead of the pity or awkwardness I expected, she responded with compassion and practical advice about fertility specialists and support groups I had never considered. Maybe you're watching this feeling isolated in your own struggles, whether it's infertility, betrayal, divorce, or any other life crisis that makes you feel like you're drowning alone. I want you to know that vulnerability, as scary as it feels, is often the bridge to the connections that will save you. Through Rebecca, I was introduced to Dr. Lisa Martinez, a therapist who specialized in helping women navigate major life transitions, and for the first time in years, I found myself in the presence of someone who could help me untangle the complicated emotions I had been carrying alone for so long. Dr. Martinez didn't just focus on Jake's betrayal. She helped me understand how my years of secret-keeping about my infertility had created patterns of shame and self-blame that were affecting every aspect of my life, not just my marriage. She introduced me to other women who were dealing with infertility, and I discovered a whole community of people who understood the monthly disappointment, the medical procedures, the well-meaning but hurtful comments from family and friends, and the complex grief of mourning children who were never conceived. The most transformative relationship that emerged from this dark period was my friendship with Maria Santos, a nurse practitioner who had gone through her own divorce after discovering her husband's gambling addiction had destroyed their finances and his promises to seek help. Maria was 5 years older than me, with a fierce independence and a laugh that could fill an entire room, and she became the sister I never knew I needed during those early months of rebuilding my life. She taught me practical things: how to change the locks on my apartment after Jake moved out, how to find a good divorce attorney, how to set up separate bank accounts. But more importantly, she showed me what it looked like to choose yourself first without apology or guilt. What struck me most about the women who entered my life during this period was how they had all used their own painful experiences as fuel for creating better, more authentic lives for themselves, rather than allowing their betrayals and losses to define them permanently. Rebecca had channeled her divorce pain into becoming one of the most compassionate doctors in our hospital. Maria had used her financial devastation as motivation to start her own successful practice, and Dr. Martinez had transformed her own therapy experience into a calling to help other women navigate similar crises. These women didn't just offer me sympathy, they offered me a blueprint for how to use this destruction as raw material for building something better, stronger, and more honest than what I had lost. For the first time since discovering Jake's betrayal, I began to believe that this ending might actually be the beginning of the life I was always meant to live. 6 months later, as I sat in my new apartment, smaller than the one I had shared with Jake, but filled with light and decorated entirely according to my own taste rather than compromise, I realized that the worst thing that had ever happened to me had also been the catalyst for the most important growth of my adult life. I had finally started fertility treatments with a specialist Rebecca had recommended, not because I was desperately trying to save my marriage or prove my worth as a woman, but because I wanted to explore every option for having the family I desired, with or without a partner. The shame and secrecy that had consumed me for 3 years had been replaced by openness and self-advocacy, and I found strength in sharing my story with other women who were fighting similar battles. My work at the hospital had even improved because I was no longer carrying the emotional burden of living a double life, pretending everything was fine while struggling internally with problems I felt too ashamed to acknowledge. The divorce from Jake was finalized on a Tuesday morning in September, exactly 1 year after the night I discovered his betrayal, and instead of feeling devastated, I felt free in a way I hadn't experienced since before we got married. Jake had been surprisingly fair in the settlement, perhaps motivated by guilt or by his desire to start fresh with Sarah and their son without the complications of a bitter ex-wife. He was paying alimony that allowed me to reduce my hospital hours slightly and focus on building a private practice that specialized in women's cardiac health, something I had always wanted to do but had never prioritized, because I was so focused on being the perfect wife who never asked for anything that might inconvenience her husband. Our last conversation had been awkward but civil, and I could see that he was genuinely happy with Sarah and their baby, which hurt but also confirmed that ending our marriage had been the right choice for everyone involved. The most surprising aspect of my recovery was discovering parts of myself that had been buried under years of trying to be the perfect wife to a man who was never fully present in our relationship anyway. I started taking art classes on weekends, something I had loved in college but had abandoned when medical school and marriage took over my life. I traveled to Italy with Maria and 2 other friends, staying in small bed and breakfasts and eating gelato for breakfast without worrying about calories or whether Jake would approve of my choices. I bought furniture that I loved without considering whether it matched his aesthetic. I adopted a rescue dog named Luna who slept in my bed and made me laugh every single day, and I started saying no to social obligations that didn't bring me joy, even if it meant disappointing people I cared about. Perhaps the most profound change was in how I approached my work and my relationships with patients, particularly women who were struggling with infertility or other reproductive health issues. My own experience with secrecy and shame had given me insights into how isolation and self-blame could compound medical problems, and I found myself having conversations with patients that went far beyond their physical symptoms to address the emotional and psychological aspects of their conditions. Several women told me that I was the first doctor who had really listened to their fears and concerns without judgment, and I realized that my own painful journey had equipped me with empathy and understanding that made me better at my job than I had ever been when I was trying to maintain a facade of having everything figured out. As I write this story, almost 2 years after that horrible night in the hospital, I can honestly say that I wouldn't change what happened, because it forced me to become the person I was always meant to be, rather than the person I thought I should be to keep someone else happy. Jake's betrayal didn't just end our marriage. It ended my pattern of hiding my struggles and needs out of fear that I wasn't worthy of love and support exactly as I am. I'm still single, still working on fertility treatments, still figuring out what the next chapter of my life will look like, but I'm doing it all with an authenticity and self-respect that I never had when I was married. Sometimes the worst betrayals are actually gifts in disguise, forcing us to stop settling for less than we deserve and start building lives that reflect our true values and desires rather than our fears and insecurities. Looking back on this entire journey, from the perfect birthday surprise that became the worst night of my life to the independence and self-respect I've found on the other side of betrayal, I want every single person watching this video to understand that your story doesn't end with someone else's betrayal. It begins with your decision to choose yourself. If this story resonates with you, if you've been through your own betrayal or are currently hiding your struggles because you're afraid of disappointing someone else, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like because I want to be part of your support system as you find your own strength. Your pain matters, your struggles are valid, and you deserve relationships built on honesty and mutual respect, not secrets and shame. Share in the comments what part of this story hit you the hardest, because I read every single comment and I want you to know that you're not walking this path alone. The most important lesson I learned through this experience is that betrayal, as devastating as it feels in the moment, often reveals truths about our relationships and ourselves that we were too afraid to acknowledge when everything seemed perfect on the surface. Jake's affair didn't create the problems in our marriage. It exposed them, showing me that we had both been living as edited versions of ourselves, rather than showing up authentically in our relationship. My infertility secret and his emotional affair were both symptoms of a deeper issue. We had built our marriage on the foundation of who we thought the other person wanted us to be, rather than who we actually were. When that facade finally crumbled, it was terrifying but ultimately liberating, because it forced both of us to stop pretending and start making choices based on reality rather than fantasy. For anyone watching this who is currently hiding something important from someone they love, whether it's infertility, mental health struggles, financial problems, or any other burden you're carrying alone, please understand that secrets have a way of poisoning relationships from the inside out, even when our intentions are good. I thought I was protecting Jake by hiding my infertility, but I was actually creating distance between us that made it easier for him to seek emotional connection elsewhere. Vulnerability is terrifying, but it's also the only path to genuine intimacy and the kind of love that can weather real storms rather than just looking good on social media. The people who are meant to be in your life will stay when you show them your struggles, and the people who leave were never really yours to begin with. 3 years ago, if someone had told me that discovering my husband's affair would ultimately lead to the best version of myself I had ever been, I would have thought they were crazy or cruel for suggesting that such devastating pain could result in anything positive. But the truth is that sometimes we need our lives to fall completely apart before we can rebuild them according to our own values and desires, rather than our fears and people-pleasing tendencies. The Emma who was hiding her infertility and planning perfect birthday surprises for an unfaithful husband was operating from a place of scarcity and desperation, constantly trying to earn love through performance rather than believing she deserved it simply for being who she was. The Emma who exists today understands that love without honesty isn't really love at all. It's just an elaborate performance that exhausts everyone involved. If you take nothing else away from this story, please remember that your worth is not determined by your ability to make other people happy at the expense of your own authenticity and well-being. Whether you're struggling with infertility like I was, dealing with betrayal like I experienced, or facing any other crisis that makes you question everything you thought you knew about your life, you have more strength and resilience than you realize, and you deserve relationships that celebrate your truth rather than requiring you to hide it. Your story is still being written, and the most beautiful chapters might be waiting on the other side of the pain you're experiencing right now, but only if you're brave enough to stop editing yourself for other people's comfort and start living as the complete, imperfect, magnificent person you actually are. After hearing my story, what would you have done in my place? What's your take on the role that secrets play in destroying relationships, even when we think we're keeping them to protect the people we love? I'm genuinely curious about your perspective, because I've learned that every betrayal story is unique, but the themes of hidden truth, broken trust, and the journey back to self-respect are universal experiences that connect us all in our humanity. Some of you might think I should have fought harder for my marriage, should have tried couples therapy or given Jake another chance after he chose Sarah and their baby over our 8-year relationship. Others might wonder why it took me so long to tell Jake about my infertility, or whether things might have been different if I had been more honest from the beginning about my struggles to conceive. Do you believe that people can truly change after betraying someone they claim to love? Or do you think that infidelity reveals something fundamental about a person's character that can never really be repaired? I've wrestled with this question countless times, especially during those early months after the divorce, when I would see Jake with Sarah and their son at the grocery store or around town, looking like the happy family I thought we were building together. There's a part of me that still wonders if Jake's affair was a symptom of our relationship problems or the cause of them, whether his betrayal was a moment of weakness that spiraled out of control or a deliberate choice that reflected his true priorities and values. What I do know for certain is that betrayal changes you in ways that go far beyond the immediate pain and anger. It forces you to examine every assumption you've made about love, trust, loyalty, and your own worth in ways that can either destroy you or make you stronger than you ever thought possible. For me, Jake's affair became the catalyst for the most honest and authentic version of myself I had ever been, pushing me to stop hiding my struggles and start advocating for my own needs and happiness without apology. The woman who discovered her husband's betrayal in that hospital room was living in fear and shame, but the woman telling you this story today has learned to choose courage and authenticity over comfort and approval every single day. The journey from betrayal to healing isn't linear or predictable. There are setbacks and breakthroughs, moments of rage and moments of gratitude, days when you feel strong and independent, and days when you question every decision you've made since your world fell apart. But if you're currently walking through your own valley of betrayal, I want you to know that it's possible to emerge from this experience with a deeper understanding of your own strength, clearer boundaries about what you will and won't accept in relationships, and a commitment to living authentically that will serve you for the rest of your life. The people who are meant to love you will love all of you, your struggles, your scars, your imperfections, and your dreams. And anyone who requires you to edit yourself for their comfort isn't worthy of the gift of your authentic presence. If you want more stories like this, Stories about finding strength in the midst of life's most challenging moments and learning to choose yourself even when it's scary and difficult. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications because I'm just getting started on this journey of sharing the truth about healing, growth, and the courage it takes to rebuild your life after it falls apart. Your story matters, your pain has purpose, and your healing journey might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to take their own first step toward freedom and authenticity. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being brave enough to face your own struggles. And I'll see you in the next video where I'll be sharing more about how to rebuild your life after betrayal and create relationships based on honesty rather than fear.